there, Alex Kidman here with my quick video review of the Microsoft Surface Laptop 7. So this is the Copilot Plus version of the Surface Laptop running on ARM. I've been testing it out over the last few weeks and, well, it's been an interesting time. Let's get into the review. So from a design perspective, well, look, Microsoft rather specifically pitched the Surface Laptop 7 as something of a MacBook Air killer back when it launched the range. And while it's not the only ARM-based Windows machine you can buy right now, as the standard bearer, it's kind of interesting to see a design that is, frankly, rather MacBook Air-esque. Available in either a 13.8-inch or, as I've got here, a 15-inch iteration, the Surface Laptop 7th edition is a nicely business-like machine from the outside, very little wrong with it, I think, with a simple square Microsoft reflective logo placed on top of the system. Opening it up reveals a full keyboard with, because this is a Copilot system, a dedicated Copilot key on the keyboard. Keyboard performance is actually quite good with nice key travel. The trackpad is likewise quite nice. I had really no complaints there. Although, I've got to be honest, I would probably plug a mouse into this thing anyway, but that's just a personal quirk, I guess. The Surface Laptop 7 supports biometric unlocking via Windows Hello through its 1080p webcam, located at the top of the display screen. And look, my own experiences with Windows Hello have been rather mixed over the years, but for the Surface Laptop 7, for the first time I have no complaints. It's genuinely recognised me quickly without issue during my review period. In terms of ports, the Surface Laptop 7 comes with dual USB-C, a single USB-A type port, a combination microphone-headphone jack, and a Surface Connect charging port. If you opt for the 15-inch model, which is what I've got in for review, you also get a microSD card slot. Now, that feels to me like an interesting choice. I'm not really sure why they didn't opt for full-size SD card, because obviously if you've got microSD, you've probably got one or more of those little adapters sitting around anyway. It just feels like that might have been a bit more flexible to me. I'm not really sure what the logic was there. In terms of colour choices, the Surface Laptop 7 ships in Sapphire, which is blue, Dune, which is sort of the gold sand colour, Platinum, which is silver, or black finishes. But as has so long been the story with Microsoft, you can't mix and match every specification with every colour or indeed size. So, for example, Sapphire and Dune are 13.8-inch colours only. Still, the overall design is fine. It works, it looks good, there's a lot to like here. The real story of the Microsoft Surface Laptop 7 is that it's Microsoft's latest foray into pushing ARM-based Windows devices, and this is not a new story. I can personally recall the days when Microsoft insisted that the Surface RT, which was also ARM-based, would be an ideal laptop for many, which it really wasn't. And that was back in 2012. And look, as such, while Microsoft's claims around performance for the Snapdragon X Plus and Snapdragon X Elite chips were quite bold, as were the claims that 90% of the app runtime for Windows 11 users would be covered either by native ARM versions or the new Prism emulator for existing x86 code, let's just say I had my doubts, because Microsoft's made these claims before, and more than once. But the reality for users of these machines has often been a frustrating one, with apps that ran slowly or not at all in some cases. It's also worth noting that the model that Microsoft sent my way specifically was a 15-inch Surface Laptop 7 with a Snapdragon X Elite 12-core CPU, 32GB of RAM, and a 1TB SSD. Quite the meaty combination, and one that would cost you some $3,699 Australian. It's the high-end play for this particular laptop, and the one that should, in theory, have the fewest application or speed issues to speak of. So what's the reality of using it like? Well, it depends. In a straight-line benchmark sense, it kicked out a score of 10,120 in PC Mark 10, well ahead of many laptops I've tested with that particular benchmark, including a bunch of gaming laptops. Throw it, however, towards a graphics benchmark, and you get less impressive results, with 3D Mark Time Spy recording a considerably less impressive score of 1,787. And that does point to the Surface Laptop as being more of an office productivity machine than a creative productivity workhorse, particularly. But then there's the question of the actual apps that you use. Not surprisingly, Office apps run well, but then they've been native ARM for some years now. It's a considerably more mixed story once you step outside the Microsoft world, although it is improving. Adobe, for example, has much of its creative suite of apps on board, although notably some apps, such as Premiere, are outright unable to run right now. Web apps will run because, well, they're web apps, but some of the add-ons for them won't. So, as an example, I can access Google Drive via a web browser, works just fine, but the Google Drive application for Windows 11 doesn't support ARM at all. And part of the challenge here, of course, is there are millions of Windows applications, and there's this kind of weird gamble you've got to take, trying to work out whether or not something has an ARM version, if you can download the ARM version, and if not, if the x86 version is actually going to run. So, for example, while it's not a gaming machine per se, I just couldn't help seeing how well the Snapdragon X Elite would stand up to a little gaming action. And again, it depends. Now, to be clear, this isn't a gaming machine, and nothing's really going to run at the level you would see on a good gaming laptop. No surprise at all. But again, I found myself in experimental territory. Some titles ran acceptably well enough, others lagged, some loaded to just black screens that went no further at all. It was a real mixed bag and kind of emblematic of some of the challenges that I did face with this particular laptop. And sure, gaming almost certainly isn't the priority for buyers of this laptop, but that kind of performance doesn't bode particularly well if your workflow involves anything likely to push the GPU all that hard. And then there's the whole inclusion of Copilot Plus, and this is meant to be the big selling point for these new, so far, ARM-based machines. And look, I've got to be honest, I'm just not that thrilled with what's on offer here. I mean, to give an example, on-device translation. Look, it's a neat enough feature, and I do get that for some business functions, the idea that your conversations with your foreign language business partners might have to fly up to the Azure cloud if you weren't using on-device. Yeah, I get that that's a thing, but the translations it provides on-device can still be surprisingly janky. So, testing with some simple and mid-complexity Japanese to English translations uncovered some pretty basic grammar errors and a few outright hilarious translations for when I threw some actual Japanese TV dialogue at it. As with services like Google Translate, you could probably get by without actually causing offense to anyone, but this is not a magical AI-led Babelfish just yet. It's a sort of maybe good enough tool, but again, I'm not seeing a huge improvement here that sending this stuff to the cloud, unless you had security concerns, wouldn't cover anyway. And it's kind of the same story when we come to Co-Creator for images, because what it produces is very similar and about the same speed as the kinds of image generation you can get from web-based services right now. I mean, I guess it's okay enough for very basic illustrations and some interesting software engineering in the background, of course, going on there, but I still feel like it's a feature that few people really need so much as a feature that makes the system itself look kind of shiny and interesting. Oh, look, you can do this thing. Yes, but when are you going to actually do that? And then we come to Recall, and I have not, to be clear, been able to test out Recall, and I'm perfectly fine with that because, honestly, Recall just feels like the biggest privacy nightmare possible to me. I really think it's not a great idea, and I'm someone who likes the idea of searchable indexes, and I absolutely support the idea of people backing up their data and having it available to them as easily as possible. But this particular implementation, Microsoft, I'm not buying. Had it been here, I would have tested it to make sure it worked, and then I would have disabled it almost immediately. And once it does come down the pipeline, once Microsoft has worked out ways that it can sell it as being a little bit more secure and a little bit less of a privacy nightmare, I'm probably still going to do exactly the same thing. I just don't want my screen screenshotted like that, ever. Then we come to the battery. And look, one of the big reasons you might want to change to ARM is for battery efficiency. That's long been the sales pitch for ARM-based Windows systems, that they got better battery life. And in my hands-on with both the Surface Pro 11 and Surface Laptop 7, Microsoft rather pointedly showed off a demo of a battery test, showing the Surface Laptop 7 rather handily beating an Apple MacBook Air M3 in a straight-line battery test. Impressive stuff, but would it play out in real-world independent testing? I had to find out. And the answer is maybe. And yeah, I know that's not super definitive, nowhere near as definitive as I'd like it to be, but the issue is that the standard way that I test batteries on Windows laptops doesn't apply here for half of my testing. So for soft battery testing, I run a 1080p looping video test, and the Surface laptop here did astonishingly well. It managed 1,509 minutes of video runtime before it exhausted its battery, or to put it directly, 25 hours and 9 minutes, way over Microsoft's own claim. Really impressive stuff there. Really a new high watermark for laptop battery power efficiency. Great, right? Well, the issue there is, yes, if that's all you're going to do with this laptop, if you're only ever going to run video, great, yeah, it'll run for a good long time. What about if you're doing something heavier duty? And here, typically, what I tend to use is PC Mark's gaming battery test. No, this isn't a gaming laptop, but I use that test because it's a really good brutal test. It's the other end of the scale, if you will. It's the, if I push this machine hard, how much can I get? Because these are workhorse machines. You are probably going to want to push them hard at some point. And the problem here is that the ARM-based version of PC Mark 10 does not include the gaming battery test. It just simply will not run. The best I could do there was actually game on this thing. Yes, this is a hard job sometimes, but I digress. The best I could do was actually game on this thing for as long as I could until the battery was exhausted, which gave me a rough sort of figure of about 2 hours. Now, that's a huge gulf in performance, and it's one where I suspect it will come down to, of course, to the applications you're using. If this is your desktop Excel or Word machine, for example, yeah, you'll be up in those higher figures. But if you're doing anything that's more seriously number crunching or using those AI features, because while the MPU here is powerful, it is going to use power if you use it a lot, you might not get through a full working day. It's a little hard to tell, and ultimately, it's really mixed. I think this is done really well, obviously, on that video test, and I can't ignore that, but its heavy-duty performance, even anecdotally, is not anywhere near as superb, and that's probably where you'd want to really see the higher gains. And it's also, of course, where that comparison with the MacBook Air M3 becomes a really interesting one, because that's a system where I can get a slightly better battery life figure for heavy-duty apps. I mean, not days and days and days or anything like that, but slightly better, and one where you don't quite have that same Windows on ARM versus Mac OS on ARM, because that's what Apple Silicon is, issues. The Rosetta emulator that Apple has actually runs pretty much everything, where the Prism emulator runs only some things at the time of recording. Hopefully that will get better, and Prism certainly is a better emulator than Microsoft has had in the past. This is a more capable Windows on ARM machine for sure. When it comes time to recharge the Surface Laptop 7, you've got the choice of the inbox charger with the classic Surface connector, or USB-C. And look, I absolutely favour USB-C here. The Surface connector just always seems to fall out. It seems like I only have to look at the thing and it goes, yeah, I'll just pop out and not charge because you looked at me funny. I'm not a big fan of that particular design. So should you buy the Surface Laptop 7? Well, it's an interesting prospect. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the best Windows on ARM machine I've ever tested. It is more powerful, it is more capable, the battery life is ultimately mostly better. All of those are big pluses. I don't see the Copilot Plus features as being a big inducement for most people right now, unless you've got some very specific needs in those spaces for on-device AI. I think they're more of a distraction than a really useful set of features. And there are still issues with running some Windows applications on ARM as to whether or not they'll run at all, or if they'll run in a slightly compromised fashion. And at this kind of price, especially for this particular machine, I don't think you really should be looking at those kind of compromises. If you spent $3,500 on a Windows laptop running a classic x86 architecture and Intel or AMD processor, you really genuinely wouldn't expect any of that kind of slowdown. So getting it here is still disappointing. And of course, you've still got to play in that experimental space as to whether or not the apps that you actually need every day are absolutely going to run. Anyway, that's my take on the Surface Laptop 7. Got any questions or comments? Hit me up below, and as always, thanks for watching all the way through to the end, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.